And welcome everybody to the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Today, I'm joined by Corey DeAngelis, the author of The Parent Revolution and also nationwide school choice advocate, to discuss with us about House Bill 1, a bill that passed here in Kentucky this past legislature, what it means for Kentuckians, what it does, what it doesn't do. I know the governor vetoed it and put some interesting things in that message that I think we can discuss about. But Corey, I know you're a busy guy, so thanks for giving us a little bit of your time here today.
Hey, Andrew, thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Before we dig into it real quick, how can people follow you, check out what you're doing if they find this conversation interesting, they want to learn more about what you have?
Yeah, I'm on X. It's at DeAngelis Corey. I post basically everything I do there. I'm also a research fellow at the Heritage Foundation. And if you want to get the book, it's endorsed by Trump and Secretary of War Pete Hegseth. It's called The Parent Revolution. Get it while it's hot. It's 40% off on Amazon right now. So go check it out.
40% off. Can't beat that. That's The Parent Revolution. So first, let's talk about House Bill 1. What exactly does the bill do? I know this is a larger discussion. It has to do with an executive order Trump signed. Let's just go into it. Let's dive right into it. So what does it actually do?
This basically allows the state to opt in to Trump's big, beautiful bill, nationwide school choice program. And 27 other states have already done so. All the Republican governors have said, yes, let's do it. It makes sense, except for one, the governor of Vermont. So, you know, maybe because he lives in the deep blue area, that also elected Bernie Sanders, a little bit of an oddball there in Vermont. But there's actually been a Democrat that's come along and done the right thing. No, his name is not Andy Beshear. It's actually Jared Polis out of Colorado, who's far left on a lot of the other issues like transgender insanity in schools. He's all about that. But even he saw the writing on the wall. Jared Polis told the Colorado Sun, a local newspaper out there, that the decision was a no-brainer for him. Those are his words. And he even went further and said that he would be crazy not to participate in Trump's new school choice program. And so why is that? It's a federal tax credit scholarship that doesn't touch a single penny of local public school funding at the state level, federal level, or the local level. And all it does is incentivize additional charitable contributions at the federal level to come into the state. And it reminds me of the 21 drinking age, where if you don't adopt the policy, you're going to miss out on a lot of additional funding. And so every state over a 4-year period decided they were going to opt in basically to the 21 drinking age to get that federal highway funding. And now, 21 is kind of the law of the land because of that. And with the federal school choice program, anybody can donate to receive the dollar for dollar tax credit up to $1,700 per year. And that's $3,400 if you're married filing jointly as well. And you're either going to give that money to the government and they're going to light it on fire and you're never going to see it again. It's going to go to fraudulent Somali daycares in Minnesota or something. It's going to be wasted. Or you can take that same money, the $1,700, and give it to a scholarship granting organization like ACE Scholarships. They've been doing this for 26 years in several states, for example, or another one. And you get that same amount back when you do your taxes in April. So you're not any financially worse off. You're actually better off because you get to dictate where your money is going. Whereas other tax benefits, you write off expenses, you don't get the full amount back. But with this, it's basically an irresistible incentive, even for Democrats, to opt in, is what Jared Polis basically said out of Colorado. And in fact, Education Week has tracked the states that have opted in and the ones that haven't made a decision yet and the ones that firmly said no. And originally they had 4 Democrat governors who had said no on their map. They colored those states in blue. And they have revised their piece since then because 3 of them are now reconsidering that decision. And that even includes the far left Oregon governor, Tina Kotek. She had a knee-jerk reaction back in August of 2025 when this first came out because she heard the words school choice. She knows that she's supposed to be against that because she's in bed with the teachers union. And she heard the word Trump, which was even a bigger red flag for her. And she said, I can't be on board with something that Trump supports. So the ultimate version of TDS. But even Tina Kotek out of Oregon has since changed her tune. Her team emailed me and also Education Week separately, confirming that we're actually reconsidering this decision because maybe they don't want to leave that additional funding on the table. And it can be used for private scholarship granting organizations to go to private school. But theoretically, public schools could also set up their own scholarship granting organizations to give to kids in the public school system to do tutoring and other, non-tuition benefits. So that could be tutoring, could be textbooks, other educational materials, after school programs as well. And so you would think that this would have more bipartisan support, but it seems like so many Democrats like Andy Beshear don't want to give any credit to President Trump for the idea that's been passed in Congress, even though Jared Polis has figured it out. And I will say, I think every state's going to opt in at some point, just like with the 21 drinking age. That took 4 years. Maybe it won't take that long with this proposal. But Andy Beshear is a total hypocrite on school choice. He went to a private school, even though he, for a long time, tried to brag about how he's a proud product of public education, which, if you do the math, he actually went to private schools for K through 12 more than he went to public schools, which, I don't blame him for that, but and he sent his kids to private school for some period of time. But you shouldn't pull the ladder up from behind yourself and fight against educational opportunities for others. So Andy Beshear is one of these school choice for me, but not for the hypocrites. And he vetoed the bill. Thankfully, the Republicans in both chambers overwhelmingly voted to override it. I believe they all voted in favor of the override, about 80 to 90% of each chamber, even though you needed only a simple majority to do so. And originally, before the veto, there was bipartisan support in both chambers. There was at least a Democrat or two in the House and Senate in Kentucky that voted because they understood, like, this is a no-brainer, just as Jared Polis put it. Why would you leave money on the table? And why would you allow your taxpayers, your constituents, to donate to organizations for scholarships to kids in places like Florida and my home state of Texas that did opt in? You would basically guarantee, if you don't opt in, that money's going to flow out of state, and that makes 0 sense. Just like the Democrat in Colorado figured out pretty quickly.
Yeah, I want to we'll discuss a little bit more about that. I also want to discuss about why states exactly had to opt in the first place. We got about a minute left in this segment. But I did have a comment, because you're talking about, Beshear saying, I'm a product of public school. He went to private schools. We know that. We know KSP took him to private schools. There's some public comments
Capital
on
Day
that.
School. I got the yearbook in my DMs.
But even then, even as a public school student, and I believe this to be true, that all the constitutional officers, the public school, they all have the same public school they send their kids to, and a lot of the government workers.
Yeah, that's right.
And so they send them to the same. So while it may be a quote unquote public school, it's kind of like saying, oh, I went to the public school in Beverly Hills, which is,
it's not very public.
Yeah. It's so specially treated because of the type of people that are in there, that it's like, you're not going to a public school alongside people of different parenting backgrounds, socioeconomical class. Generally, especially if it's a Democrat, you're going to a school full of kids from the same thought processes, same background, same everything. And it's not quite like what you get in other schools where you have an issue in public schools where you have kids at different parts of learning because of different parental involvement, and that slows down certain kids, speeds up other. You see what I'm saying? We all know this. We all know the follies. But we'll be back here in just a short minute, talking here with Corey DeAngelis, author of The Parent Revolution, a school choice advocate nationwide, talking about House Bill 1 here in Kentucky, what it actually does. We'll be back in a few short minutes. And you're back on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. I'm joined by Corey DeAngelis, the author of The Parent Revolution, as well as a nationwide school choice advocate. We're talking about House Bill 1, a bill that opts Kentucky into this Trump tax credit system to be able to provide scholarships. I have several questions about the program itself, Corey. One is, of course, why did states have to opt in the first?
Yeah.
What does opting in mean? Because you made a comment before we left where even if Kentucky didn't opt in, the residents of Kentucky would still be able to benefit from the tax break or tax dollar for dollar refund up to $1,700 because they could just give in other states. So what is it that the state had to do to allow these funds to be established within state? Why was that required?
Yeah, and I will say that $1,700 is not the scholarship amount. So that's just the amount that you can claim on your taxes and get a dollar for dollar credit back. But the scholarship granting organizations where the parents actually go to get the funding to go to a private school or to use for homeschool expenses, they could decide to make the scholarship $10,000. So for listeners, if you're thinking $1,700, that's not enough to go to private school. Well, it's almost certainly going to be the case that the scholarship granting organizations are going to make the amount of funding per student to actually be higher than 1,700. So you're right. The benefit at the federal level doesn't require the state to opt in because you can get that federal tax credit. You can donate regardless of what your governor does. And originally, the initial legislation was called the Educational Choice for Children Act. It got into the reconciliation bill in Congress, and the original version that passed the House didn't require states to opt in. But the thing is, when it got to the Senate, the parliamentarian who was appointed by a Democrat in Congress actually stripped out the school choice program from the reconciliation bill. And I heard from Ted Cruz and others who fought to get it back in. Part of the deal-making process to get school choice back into the federal reconciliation bill was to allow individual states to opt in. But it doesn't require the legislature to opt in. It's just solely in the hands of the governor unless the legislature passes a policy to kind of force the hand of the governor to get them to opt in. So Kentucky is the first state to kind of do it this way. Every other state, it's been the governor deciding, I'm just going to opt in. Other red states with Democrat governors are currently trying to do what Kentucky did. For example, Arizona has a Democrat governor. But the Republicans don't have a supermajority big enough to override a veto in Arizona. So if Hobbs vetoes that, Arizona's still not going to be able to opt in. Same thing with Kansas. Laura Kelly is an opponent of school choice. So if she follows Beshear's lead and vetoes the bill that was sent to her desk by the Kansas Republicans, it's not clear whether those Kansas Republicans are all going to lock arms to override which was the case in Kentucky. You'd think they'd be able to do it in Kansas too. So that's basically why states have to opt in now. Maybe that'll change sometime in the future, but Kentucky is kind of leading the way here and getting the legislature to force the hand of the governor. In fact, the House Bill 1 takes the power away from the governor of opting in and moves it over, I believe, to the Secretary of State, which happens to be a Republican in Kentucky who's a supporter of school choice. I believe he's already announced, yeah, I'm going to sign it. We're going to opt in. And so this was desperately needed in Kentucky too, because the Supreme Court is full of judicial activists at Kentucky. I've never seen anything like it, where they blocked a state level tax credit scholarship program in Kentucky where yes, the Kentucky Constitution says you have to have a public school system, but as the Idaho State Supreme Court said, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. You can have a public school system while also giving families more educational opportunities. And that's how basically every other state Supreme Court has ruled in the favor of school choice in other states. And every state constitution has an education clause. Kentucky is not special in this way. And I know this issue went to the ballot when it came to the constitutional amendment in Kentucky, but that was a losing proposition to begin with, because voters, if they don't understand what's going on, it's very complicated. They're going to vote for the status quo. They're going to vote no. So the odds were stacked. The deck was stacked against us in that ballot fight, especially because the school districts were using taxpayer resources to advocate against the constitutional amendment, which is illegal in Kentucky. But under current law, there's no enforcement mechanism. There's no consequences for breaking the law. So even though Attorney General Coleman called out districts for doing this, and I called them out too, and then they ultimately ended up blocking me on social media in some cases, which led to me winning in federal court against one of the school districts for violating my First Amendment rights, for calling them out on basically breaking the law and using taxpayer resources to advocate against a ballot measure. There's now a bill in Kentucky that's on the governor's desk, Senate Bill 59, I believe, by Steve Rawlings, a huge school choice supporter as well, but he attaches consequences in his bill to using taxpayer resources to lobby against or for a ballot measure, which is what they were doing on the school choice amendment. So the bill was watered down a little bit. I believe it was a felony in the first case if you did so, which it should be, and you couldn't hold a position of public trust for 10 years. That part was taken out. It was reduced from a felony to a misdemeanor. But hey, I'll take a step in the right direction from 0 to misdemeanor, even if it's not everything we wanted. And we'll see what Governor Beshear is going to do here. I mean, this puts him in a tough predicament. This is already something that's illegal. Does he really want to get behind the idea of the government using your money against you and letting school districts engage in this blatant political activity? We'll see what he does.
Well, I mean, considering a lot of times, he's using it for his own benefits. Certainly, we've seen some statewide emails going out about the budget to school parents and everything else, trying to get them to go ahead and go against it. I want to read for you, if I can, the governor's veto message and his argument against why he vetoed House Bill 1, and just kind of get your feedback on some of his points. Can we do that?
Yeah, let's go ahead.
Okay, so he says, as Kentuckians, we love our public schools. They are anchors in our communities as a big part of our individual and collective identity. During weekdays, we drop our kids off. Junk. Okay. Throughout our history, Kentuckians have been firm that public dollars should only be used for public education. In fact, our Kentucky Constitution has specific provisions that requires voter approval for such dollars to be used elsewhere. In 2024, our General Assembly followed the required process, asking people of Kentucky if they want to spend public dollars on private or charter schools. The answer was a resounding no. The effort was defeated by 30 points. He put an exclamation point. That's interesting in a veto message. That was the same margin of victory as Donald Trump in Kentucky. If it was rejected in all 120 counties, both rural and urban, by significant margins. The message was clear. Don't divert public dollars. Fund our public schools. As governor, I've heard the message. I've proposed teacher raises pre-K for all 4-year-olds and dollars for technology and continuing education. I've funded major renovations to our career and technical education centers. I've pushed for more money for transportation and have worked to provide more mental health programs for our students. Yet and time again, the Republican supermajority in the Kentucky General Assembly has failed our public schools and shirked its constitutional duty to sufficiently fund them. He goes on to talk about funding and everything else. With House Bill 1, the supermajority is at it again, wanting to use federal tax credit to divert public dollars to private schools. While the Kentucky Constitution says that's up to the voters, the bill allows the Secretary of State in office with no public education or taxation duties to decide. They believe he is also anti-public education and will implement the credit. It is time to listen to voters. It is time to serve our children, not private or corporate interests, to recognize we serve the people of Kentucky, and they overwhelmingly oppose these efforts. I recognize my veto today will be politicized. Some will attack teachers' unions as if they're malevolent actors, when in reality they are neighbors and friends who've taken on critical jobs despite the low pay. They should be appreciated instead of attacked. So essentially, he said that this is taking public dollars from private schools. Now, Corey, this is somebody donating to.
It's not public dollars. There's no such thing as public dollars. They're taxpayer dollars to begin with, but these aren't even tax dollars. These are private donations, voluntary contributions donated from people at the federal level. It doesn't touch a single penny of local public school, local funding, state funding, or federal funding. So the Supreme Court has ruled on this, and it had to do with an Arizona tax credit scholarship program. I believe in 2011, it's the ACSTO v. Wynn decision at the Supreme Court. from, I believe, 2011, finding that that money, private dollars remain private until they enter the tax collector's hands. And so by definition, if you take Andy Beshear's logic to the extreme, that means that government owns everything. All of your money is public money. That everything is society's money. You don't have the right to own your own property. You don't have the right to own your own funding. Under his definition, private dollars don't exist, because you could make the argument that, well, that money could have went to the public schools. We could have stole it from you through the government tax system. So those are tax dollars. They're all our money, not yours. It's total communist gobbledygook coming from Andy Beshear. And this is the same kind of logic we heard from the Kentucky Supreme Court when they struck down the state level tax credit scholarship program. This is a tax credit. It is funding that has not entered the tax collector's hands. These are not public dollars. And so it's also just pure hypocrisy coming from Andy Beshear.
Well, I think it's also kind of a dark idea. I want to explain what I mean. It just, the insinuation there's kind of dark. We're coming up on a break. But it's just kind of dark there. We'll talk about that when we get back. And then also I want to talk about just some other things I've seen online attacking these provisions, because I know other Kentuckians are seeing it as well, and what pushback you have there. So we'll be right back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Stay with us. We have Corey DeAngelis, author of The Parent Revolution, nationwide school choice advocate. We'll be continuing our discussion with him when we get back here in just a few short minutes. And you're back on the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics, discussing with Corey DeAngelis, author of The Parent Revolution and nationwide school choice advocate, about House Bill 1, bill that passed this session, opting Kentucky into a federal tax credit program for scholarships. We're going over, Corey, the governor's veto message, and in it he said, look, if we offer this tax credit, we're going to be taking public dollars out of the public. So that's what he's saying. Now, what seems so insidious to me, what seems so kind of dark about that statement, is what he's saying is these tax credits offer a choice to students that otherwise wouldn't have it. He's acknowledging that, because how funding works in these public schools, as we all know, it's a head count. The more heads you have, the more dollars you get. So when they say this is taking money away from public schools, even if it's not cutting funding and cutting that amount per student, what he's saying to me is, we know if we offer this choice, kids that otherwise have no other choice, but this public school, parents that have no other choice, will opt into this choice and go somewhere else. And so rather than competing with our public schools, we're going to try to force these kids into a situation that their parents and them do not find to be the best situation, clearly, if they would pick something else. And essentially, those kids belong to the state. For that reason, that there are kids to hold on to. Is that, am I misreading that? Or do you
no, you're right. He wants to lock kids in the failure factories that he would never send his own children to. You're right. There's a difference in quality across public schools, even because they discriminate on the basis of zip code. I have one here nearby in San Antonio, Texas, where you could theoretically transfer your kid there if they accept you, if you have the right disciplinary records, if you have the right testing records, and they reassess you every single year. And guess what? In addition to that, they charge you $10,000 a year on top of what you're already paying in the property taxes if you want to transfer your kids. So they're more like private institutions than many private schools. And look, Andy Beshear is basically saying that if you don't have the money to pay for private education like his parents did, like he did at some point for his kids, and if you can't live in the fancy neighborhoods with the most expensive houses to be assigned to the best public schools, well, then too bad. You're going to be forced into the failing system that he would never send his own children to. So it's total hypocrisy on the part of Andy Beshear. And it's just, it's this whole concept of, public money for public schools is his favorite teachers union rallying cry. I mean, I thought they even moved on from that, because we've pointed out time and time again that Democrats like Andy Beshear support so-called public money for private everything else. They want you
Well,
to be able to
even in
spend.
schooling, if you take a look, he mentions his preschool program in that veto
Yeah, that's
message.
private
His
pre-Ks.
preschool program is a school choice program. It's
Exactly.
a
And
voucher system for preschool.
so Andrew, why would he support public money going to private preschools, public money going to private colleges when you think about Pell Grants and other scholarships for college, but not support it for those in between years of K through 12 education? Because it has everything to do with special interest politics. He's in bed with Randy Weingarten. He just had her on his podcast. He's has this incestuous relationship with the
You know
teachers
what, Corey?
union.
That's news to me and everyone else because I
Yeah, he
think
had her.
only you and 5 other people probably watched that
Yeah, well,
episode.
yeah, there we go. But he's buddies with Randy Weingarten, and uh, the problem is when you have choice for K through 12 education for Democrat politicians, that threatens a special interest who controls them, the teachers union that gives them all their political contributions. And if you think about that ballot measure from in recent years that had to do with the constitutional amendment, which is very convoluted and confusing for voters, which stacks the deck against the yes vote. The NEA and the teachers unions poured, I believe, about $6 million in opposition, flooding the airwaves to try to say that this was going to destroy the public school system, which, by the way, has never happened anywhere else. The public schools always get better in response to competition. So if you really want to destroy the public school system, what you would really do is quadruple down on Andy Beshear's rhetoric and fight against educational freedom, because that cements the monopoly and guarantees the public schools are going to get worse and worse. They're going to take more of your money. They're going to have zero accountability. And the kids are going to get screwed. The teachers are going to get screwed too. Why? Because when you're a monopoly, you have no incentive to spend money wisely. It goes towards administrative bloat. It goes towards the people at the top, like the superintendents. It goes towards the union bosses. But the teachers don't see the funding because it's not spent in the classroom. All they do is want a bigger voting block when it comes to union presidents. And that means they just hire more people, which means more dues paying members. It means more money for their political buddies. And it means more boots on the ground to fight for Democrat lefty
One
causes.
of the points I made recently was that, since 2019, funding at K through 12 schools in Kentucky has increased 27%. And I asked the question, if funding per student, not overall, but they've had a student body go, funding per student increased 27%. And I asked the question, all these people talking about teachers raises, have teachers gotten a 27% raise to go along with it?
No, and have the outcomes gotten 27% better? That hasn't worked out either.
No. But I think that is certainly an important point. Now, some people have some pushback to it. So I want to talk through what some of the things I hear is. So one of the things I hear is that, look, this will only benefit kids already going to private schools. This program, what will happen is people like me who send my kids to private school, I'll put money in, I'll get my family members to put money in, and then they'll just issue a scholarship to pay for my kids' private school education. And so it's really just helping out the people who can already afford private schools and not helping people who can't afford them. Corey, what's your response to that?
There's a lot of low-income families in private schools too that are barely scraping by, who might even not even be able to send their kids to private school again next year without the scholarship. So there's a lot of low-cost Catholic schools, for example, where there's a lot of low-income families using sending their kids to those institutions. And by the way, if your argument is that higher income people might benefit too, too bad. Everybody should benefit. It's we should not be picking winners and losers. If anything, those families are paying more in taxes than anybody else. They should at least get a few $1,000s back. It's their money. Nobody should be forced to pay twice. But at the end of the day, this program still disproportionately benefits the least advantaged more than anybody else, because this gives them an additional opportunity, a better chance at being able to send their kids to a private school. And they're the ones that are stuck in the worst failing government-run schools today. But if your argument is that, well, some higher income folks and some people who already pay for private school may benefit too, it's like, okay, so what? They should have never been forced to pay twice. And so they should get some of that money back too. I think that's an argument in favor of the program, not against it.
Well, and
There's more groups benefiting than we initially thought. Great. They should benefit.
Well, and if it, and this has always been my thought, if it was about setting up a program that only benefits the people who currently are sending their kids to private school, they would have passed a law just to say you can write off private school tuition on your taxes, because you're not allowed to do that now. I mean, you're not allowed to write off your private school tuition on your federal income taxes. And so they could have just passed a law saying you can deduct up to $10,000 of private school tuition per kid on your federal income tax dollars. And that would have only affected people who can currently afford it and not have offered up any opportunities to anyone. But that's not the route they went.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, it's not a personal deduction. It is a contribution to a scholarship granting organization so that you're not just benefiting for your own family. And I will say the current version has a cap on income. So billionaires couldn't use the program, even though I believe they should be able to. Billionaires can send their kids to public school. So until you cap income on the public school system, you shouldn't be picking winners and losers when it comes to private school choice either. But the current bill limits to families that make, I believe, up to 300% of the median income in the area. I did the quick math in Dallas, Texas, for example, and that included over 90% of the population in Dallas. So it's actually pretty close to universal. 90% of the way there is a huge step in the right direction. But we should totally eliminate that cap in the future. But but for this argument that it's only helping the most advantaged today, that cuts against that argument, the provision in the bill. And then also, if you look at the families who benefit from school choice in other states that have been doing this for a long time, Florida, they have over 600,000 scholarships today, students using private school choice. But when I saw the data a few years ago, the average household income of the people using the program was about $40,000 a year. And that was the case in Washington, D.C. as well. It was about $40,000 a year, even in a higher income area like Washington, D.C. So the reality is people from all different backgrounds are benefiting. And that's okay. And as long as it's available to everyone, as long as we're not saying, oh, you're low income, you can't use the program, this is not for you. That's not what's happening here. The thing is, low income families want opportunities too. And they're not going to have those choices unless we provide them with those opportunities. And this is one way to do that.
Well, when we come back, we'll continue to discuss some of the arguments against this bill here. So stay with us. Corey DeAngelis, author of The Parent Revolution, nationwide school choice advocate. We'll be right back. And you're back on the Andrew Cooperrider Show, joined by Corey DeAngelis, the author of The Parent Revolution and nationwide school choice advocate, talking about House Bill 1, bill that passed this year here in Kentucky, opting Kentucky into the Trump educational scholarship program, where people can donate their own dollars into a scholarship program in order for that program to be able to offer scholarships up to people to be able to have some choices in maybe where they go. So some of the complaints. So we talked in the last segment about how one of the common arguments against this is, it's only going to help the wealthy people. Only the wealthy people will get the chance to go ahead and jump into it and use it. Another complaint or attack against it, I guess, that I hear is that, this won't benefit people in rural areas of Kentucky. And this was an argument heard during our school choice amendment battle too, that this doesn't do anything and actually supposedly hurts these people in rural areas that don't have school choice opportunities, and it won't help them. What do you say back to those people?
That's hilarious, because the oldest school choice program in the country, the two oldest actually, started in the late 1800s, over 150 years ago in Maine and Vermont. They're called town tuitioning programs, and they were created specifically for kids in rural areas that didn't even have public schools. So the state would give the funding directly to the parents. They'd be able to choose public schools in other areas, or they'd be able to use that funding for private school tuition and fees, even religious schools as well. So they figured out over 150 years ago in places like Maine and Vermont that not having options was an argument to expand opportunities not to restrict them. So if anything, being in a rural area where you don't have a lot of private education opportunities, this is an argument. This is a stronger argument to have educational funding follow the student, especially because in this bill and many others we've seen across the country, is that it allows for homeschool expenses as well. You don't need to create a new brick and mortar private school that has large fixed costs. You could create a micro school. You could have just educating your own kids at home and using the funding for homeschool curriculum and tutoring and textbooks. And so families in rural areas will be helped as well. And we've seen that when you build it, they will come. You look in places like Florida, they've put out data over the past decade. As they've expanded school choice, the number of private education providers in their most rural counties actually doubled. So you may have one option today in the private sector in your rural county, but maybe you'll have two when parents actually have the funding that follows their student that they could use to provide. So supply meets demand in every other area in the economy. It works in education as well. Economics is the name of the game. And when you build it, they will come. And I will say the main argument, Andrew, is that they'll say, oh, in these counties, it doesn't benefit a single kid. They can't use this program, which I just rebutted that. But let's take that argument to the next step in its logical conclusion is they'll also say in the next breath, these same opponents to school choice will say, on the one hand, we can't use it. It doesn't benefit us. On the other hand, it's going to destroy our fantastic rural public schools. Well, hold up. Wait a second. Which one is it? If your schools are so fantastic in the public sector, you should have nothing to worry about from a little competition. But two, it's even worse than that. If it's true that families can't vote with their feet anywhere else and there's no other options, well, then you should be the last person arguing this is going to destroy your public school because they're not going to lose any funding attached to that student if they're not going to go anywhere else. The thing is, they try to throw everything at the wall to see what will stick, even if they're logically incompatible with one another, saying both of these things at the same time. The thing is, rural schools improve in response to competition too. And if they're doing such a fantastic job, they should have nothing to worry about at all. And families from all different backgrounds can benefit. And I saw polling when we were fighting this issue in my home state of Texas over and over again, even from like universities doing the polling, not exactly your conservative bastions of thought. They were finding majority support of Texan support, even when you use the biased term of vouchers, which tax credits aren't vouchers, but all that aside, if anything, they found that when you splice the data, the voters in the rural areas were actually more supportive of school choice than the voters in the urban areas, even though there was majority support across demographics and different areas. So
you said something in that answer, though, that I hear as a negative all the time. You talked about homeschoolers being able to benefit. Now, I hear and I see online all the time, homeschoolers, especially here in Kentucky, where they're relatively, there's like no real like government getting involved in homeschooling. You just got to announce, I'm homeschooling my kid. And if they ever do an inspection, have some sort of like curriculum or something to show. But one thing I hear is that they say, well, if this is expanded into homeschools, it'll open up the door for homeschool families to be able to be regulated more by the government, and it'll set a slippery slope precedent. Have you heard that before, Corey?
I've heard it, and it's making perfect the enemy of the good. It's a version of fear mongering. And I will say House Bill 1 didn't have additional government regulations baked into the bill, but their argument is that if you accept government shekels, you'll get government shackles. But the reality, Andrew, is that you can get the shackles without the shekels. Look at places like Maryland. Their Democrats just passed a bill the other day out of their House, 100 to 35. Every Democrat voted against it. Basically, every Republican or voted in favor of this regulation. Basically, every Republican voted against it. So it was a party line vote. And it has nothing to do with school choice. They don't have school choice. And they voted to regulate every single private school from pre-K through college in Maryland. And it even goes as far as to say that the private schools have to surrender their admissions processes over to the state. They have to embrace transgender insanity. And that wasn't because of school choice. That was because you have authoritarians in office who think they know better than you. And you look at other blue states like Illinois. Guess what? They got rid of school choice in 2023. The next year, they came after the homeschoolers, even though 40,000 people signed up in opposition to the bill. New Jersey, they were coming after the homeschoolers. Hawaii, they also fought to regulate homeschoolers. New York, they have some of the worst homeschooling laws on the books. When you look at their freedom from regulation, they have so much regulation in New York. They don't have school choice. But on the other hand, freedom fighters in Kentucky and elsewhere can walk and chew gum at the same time. The same people who fight to expand school choice are the ones that fight for more homeschool freedom too. For example, New Hampshire just passed universal school choice, and the Republicans through their House just passed a bill the other week to make New Hampshire one of the most homeschool regulation-free state in the nation. And so Ohio, they passed universal school choice in 2023. They also deregulated homeschooling in the same bill. Same thing in Missouri. They passed an expansion of their school choice program in 2024. The Republicans also in the same bill deregulated homeschooling. Same thing with Wyoming. Are you sensing a pattern here? The problem isn't school choice. The problem is the authoritarians who both hate school choice and home education freedom. They're the ones that are coming for your right to educate your kids as you see fit. So if anything, school choice works as a barrier, as a way to fight against those authoritarians by building a bigger coalition. If you have more people on your team fighting back against those future calls for regulation, you're more likely to win against the people who want to control everything you do and try to tell you how you have to raise your own children. So we should fight together in this battle against the socialists. We shouldn't find ourselves on the side of Randy Weingarten and Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, just because we're overthinking things. At the same time, eternal vigilance is the price of liberty, and you're more likely to win that fight if you have people on your team. So let's work together and stop missing the forest for the trees.
Well, and I've always said to those people myself, I said, look, what's stopping them from regulating you? It's the same forces that are stopping them from regulating you now will stop them from regulating you into the future. Well, Corey, thank you so much. Once again, where can people find you on X? Just search Corey DeAngelis.
Yep. Yeah, it's at DeAngelis Corey, or search Corey DeAngelis. And the last thing is, school choice programs are always voluntary. So you have to accept the scholarship. If the cost outweigh the benefits for you in a particular year, that's your prerogative, but you shouldn't tell other parents that they can't choose.
Absolutely. Well, Corey, thank you so much for your time. Well, y'all, that's what we got time for today. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you next week.